Welcome to Wealth Coffee Chats, folks, for your daily live updates. Get the most out of today's episode by participating in the chat. Make sure you ask some questions, be part of the conversation, have a bit of fun, grab a coffee or a tea, take some notes, and get ready to start your day, folks. Quick few housekeeping rules, though. No spamming, no advertising or self-promotion in the chat. That's not on. Be kind and respectful to everyone when participating. And most of all, have a good time. Real estate investing can be your biggest asset. It also can be your most expensive asset when it comes to getting it right or getting it wrong, folks. It can be time-consuming, stressful, and that's why here at Positive, we have what's called a 6-star team, a full-service team that provides integrated wealth and property investing solutions and services simply designed to help you progress towards your goal of passive income through your property portfolio, folks. Make sure you check out our other podcasts on the Positive Mentor Network. Not only is there Wealth Coffee Chats, there's the Urban Property Investor. Drops every Wednesday with straight talking investing strategies and lessons with Sam Saggers. Property Investor Tales. This is where our clients, you guys, share real life stories from property investing, hosted by some of our advisors and strategists. And that's done every fortnight, dropping every Monday. Wealth, Wine and Wisdom, folks, that debriefs the week that was in the world of finance and property, hosted by yours truly, Jason Witten and Andy Fenton on Fridays. Welcome to another Wealth Coffee Chats. Marvellous Monday. Hope you're well, folks, wherever you are. If you think it's Get Rich Quick, you're in the wrong place. This is the wrong podcast. This is the wrong live for you. Welcome to another Wealth Coffee Chat. Hope you're all awesome and well.
Morning, gang, or should I say good evening. Kevin, good to see you dialing in from Florida. Andy Fenton here for another Wealth Coffee Chats, filling in for Jason Witten, who's climbing away somewhere in the world at the moment. Mate, hope you're safe, hope you're enjoying yourself, and mate, looking forward to having you back next week. But as I said, Andy Fenton here, Wealth Coffee Chats. Welcome, team. My role here is to keep you entertained this morning. I promised for those of you who were dialing in earlier in the week, we had a little bit of a chat about some of the facts and figures and some of the more detailed stuff. But I thought today we'd rock on and have a little bit of a look-see at what's in the news. Also thought we'd chat a little bit about the US, politics, all of those wonderful things that I know that you guys love. So it'll be an opinion piece today, ladies and gents, so take everything liberally. There's my little disclaimer for the day. Always chat with your advisors before acting on any advice, especially any of the stuff that comes out of my mouth this morning, because I have been watching the news and reading the news, and jeepers creepers, it's a very interesting world out there. So grab your coffee, grab your drink, turn off your camera if you're driving. Of course, you're not on Zoom, so you don't have a camera on anyway, and let's get into it. It's good to see you all here today. Give us a shout out. Jeff, good to see you, mate. Mr. Fenton, yes. Justin, great to see you in. Welcome. Tim, mate, welcome. Good to see you this morning. Luke, great to have you on board. And Kevin from Florida, good evening. I think we've got to start signing these off. Good morning, good evening, and good night. And command style. So, team, politics and facts. Where do the two meet? Does anybody know? Whack it in the chat if you know where the politics and facts meet. Many people have been trying to figure this one out for quite some time. I'm interested in your take because the two do actually catch up some places along the lines. It seems to be more and more difficult to find these days. But where do you reckon? Whack it in the chat. Where do you reckon politics and facts actually meet? I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey. Some interesting headlines that I pulled out of the Financial Review, one of the great sources for information out there. Interested? Whack it in the chat. Where do you think politics and facts meet these days? And I'll get into a little bit of what's around the news and hopefully give you some just above the bend. One might say slightly cynical view there. Brad may be very, very correct. They meet in the polling booth. Luke, a very pragmatic approach. Some might argue that maybe the facts don't get through the polls. Maybe not. But yes, interesting. I've got a view on it. Maybe correct, maybe not. Let's see. So what I'm going to take you through today is just some interesting headlines. Probably relate them back to what's actually happening out there, investment markets, economic markets, things of that nature. Try and give you a bit of a perspective. Maybe ask some more big questions, because ultimately investing in life is about asking great questions and then taking action on those questions. So maybe we can find some really good quality questions today that we can start asking and seeing how they apply to us. So let's jump into it, ladies and gents. Time is already ticking away. Like I said, grab your coffee. Whoops, I have to plug this in, don't I? That will help. Power always helps. I've made an absolute cracker today. This is amazing coffee. Shout out to the champions down at Common Folk for making incredible beans down on the Mornington Peninsula. All right. So this was a little bit of an interesting one, and I thought there's some themes that sit behind it. From the Fin Review, go and check it out. Interesting read. Telstra will raise its prices, most of its mobile plans, with some rising well above inflation rate. There's two things to consider here, because we're seeing a little bit more of inflation starting to hit, but not the COVID inflation, not the standard sort of inflation that was built up by supply chains getting disrupted. A lot of that is now normalized, right? So the costs of things becoming more expensive because there was a high demand for it, but very low supply for it. That drops up throughout COVID, and most of construction is still up. But the part that tends to slow through inflationary cycles like that is the wage cost, because ultimately what tends to happen, and in small to medium businesses, they tend to operate and catch on a little bit slower. Not saying that Telstra is a small business by any stretch of the imagination, but the cost of inflation that relates to then the demand for higher wages by people has a slower effect through inflation. And that's what we're seeing. Higher interest rates, higher costs of goods for the general public. That inflation figure did jump up. Even though it comes back down, it doesn't mean when the inflation figures come back down, it doesn't mean that costs are becoming less expensive, right? And that's an important thing to remember. So if inflation goes up to 7% for a year, and then it comes back down to 2%, well, things are only getting 2% more expensive from where they got from the 7%, if that makes sense, right? So the tide is always rising when it comes to inflation. And I'm not saying with Telstra, this isn't necessarily specific to that. I've chatted with a few broker friends, and they've got some interesting perspectives, and I'll share a couple of them with you. None definitive, they are perspectives, but certainly that wage increase ends up hitting the bottom line of businesses, and businesses then need to put up their income in more service-based businesses. So sorry, they not their income, their products, their services. They have to raise their prices in order to meet the demand of rising costs to their team members' pockets, so that the revenue that they earn, their wages, goes up, and as a result, the cost of business goes up, and so that gets passed on to the consumer, which is you. So this tends to happen later in these types of cycles, and we're seeing more and more of this. It's called in some areas, it's called service-based inflation, and so we're starting to see that the material costs went up; they were the first. Now we're starting to see businesses start to really push up the cost of other goods that are based on the productivity of people, based on wages going up. All right, so that's a part of what we're seeing out there in the inflationary environment. And as I said, if it went up by 7%, then the next year it's 2%. Well, it's 9% effectively. Well, it's closer to 10 really, but it's 9% up. So it doesn't mean that costs come down. It just means that they're not accelerating upwards as quickly, right? So this inflation figure from Telstra got me thinking about that. Also got me thinking about the competition in that area. Now everyone's got a cell phone at the moment, but businesses are also starting to look at different avenues of doing business, and not all of them are in the cell phone market. Believe it or not, mechanisms like what we're chatting on right now are now starting to become more and more prolific. Did you know that you can get a Teams phone number? Did you know that you can get a Zoom phone number? Did you know that team members really don't even need a mobile phone to operate? They could operate off a tablet, they could operate off a computer, or they can operate off a phone in some cases. They don't need all three. They can operate potentially off one, depending on which business that you're in. So there's potential and demand for some of these products that may or may not fall as a result of that. So interesting. We'll get some more information on Telstra. I think it's going to be an interesting one to follow into the future. But the inflationary conversation is still very, very alive. And those people who say, well, costs of goods have come down. Well, let's see what happens with inflation as businesses, especially the small to medium businesses, right, which typically on average are, you would say, less informed or don't have the resources to keep up to date with inflationary data and the mechanics of this. We will see that sector start to have to adjust their costing in order to be able to stay viable moving forward. Give me a why if that makes sense, or if you want me to jump into more detail, say jump into the detail, Fenton, whack it into the chat. But hopefully that all makes sense. And you might be seeing that if you're a professional investor on a salary out there. You may have been trying to get that wage increase. Maybe you're feeling the pinch in the pocket. Maybe the conversation sitting in the back of your head. I don't know. But I thought that it might be interesting to bring up. Jeff, I can't put that up there. But I love the commentary. So the next one. Australian shares are set to dip on Monday despite a strong lead from Wall Street as investors brace for the release of the crucial US inflation data. So another inflation data. But the headline that I'm really focused on here is the one down the bottom. ASX to sit out global rally amid iron ore woes. So what does all this mean? So iron ore woes, effectively the price of iron ore has dropped quite considerably. And that is a major part of Australia. A major part of Australia's export is actually made up of iron ores. I've got some details that I'll share with you in a moment, some factual details, and I'm just dropping a hint as to where the two meet. But ultimately, China went on a massive production. People probably are aware of Evergrande, one of the major property collapses, which apparently was going to blow the whole system up. Hasn't happened. One might argue the system blew up years ago, but we'll talk about the facts here today, and that might be a fact as well. Who knows? But the Evergrande, Evergrande. I'm ordering a venti coffee now. The Evergrande debacle. I mean, one of the times I used to go over to China as part of China study tours for investing. We were leading them, and we used to take advisors from around Australia over there just to show them what was going on. And we saw some of the construction of these ghost cities, and it really was just absolutely spectacular. And the data that we were fed there is there are 500 billion lost people over there. What do you mean by lost people? Are they lost like as in they've just not quite sure about what they want to do with their life? No, they meant lost people as in they weren't on the equivalent of the census, if you will. So 500 billion, keeping in mind that we're 25 odd million, so a fairly significant number of people. So the idea was the mobilization of these people into the middle class, and they build the cities, and they will come. That saw a massive demand for Australian resources and saw that big mining boom, major part of it. Now that obviously fell off. The rest of the world started consuming more of our product, but that major surge through China stopped. We're now sort of seeing some of the fallout of the collapse of those places continuing to be ghost towns. But it really was. It was something to be admired. The state of production, the sort of magnitude of it. It really was quite incredible to see. So China obviously slowed down on that. Now they're still using a fair bit of our resources. There's talk of deals with other countries like Russia in regards to some of their mineral deposits, and we'll see how that transpires to the future. But ultimately, this is where politics starts to come into it as well. China was really responsible for dragging Australia through the GFC, and we're in positions that what some people might argue there's future instability. But China is pretty pivotal in the the future of of our prosperity, really. And it's interesting. I've got some really cool stats to take you through a little bit later on. So iron ore, political decisions around iron ore, consumption story. Let's keep going. What else have I got on? So this was the next one. Now, this was from Ray Dalio. Now, Ray Dalio, yeah, I hadn't seen him comment as much as he has more recently. But for those of you who don't know, Ray Dalio is known as one of the most successful investors in the world. He's a I can't get Trump and Biden's name out of my head, oh, jeepers, I've got a mental blank. Who does everyone think of when it's the greatest investor the world's ever seen? Not Bernie Madoff, which is the name that keeps sticking in my head. Warren Buffett, that's the one. He's sort of Warren Buffett-esque, Ray Dalio, if you don't know. He got an incredible book on investing. Highly recommend the read. But this was an interesting headline in the Fin Review. I feel like I'm faced with the choice between a strong, unethical, almost fascist Republican Party and a frail, untruthful, and enigmatic Democratic Party. No one is worth voting for. Now that's the comments over in the US, and I don't think that is like this isn't where we're going to start to get into American politics too much, because it's a bit of a shit show. It really is. And I think the general consensus, if you're watching political commentary in the US, watching political commentary globally, and potentially France is leading the way with this. And again, this is a theory of mine, and it's not got anything to do with fact, but I think that strong political change generally comes when there is enough people who are just fed up and pissed off. And then typically what happens is that the voters speak, they get in like a Tea Party or somebody very, very left or very, very right to come in to rebalance the equation. And typically those Tea Parties come in and they do a lot of damage, but they allow the Liberal, Labor, Republican, Democrats to go back into their relative corners, right, from where they used to have meaning and where they used to have opposed opinions and policies. It allows them to go back and then fight for, their opposing views. Now, that's, what's happened in the past. That's why I've got my Back to the Future mug on. Plus, super keen to see the new Back to the Future. I think that'll be amazing. A couple of cool actors, I think that will do the job very, very well. So if we want to see political change, it typically comes from unrest and it comes from the voters, right? Now, in America, it really is quite incredible. Like to think about, these two people are competing for the control of currently the superpower of the world. But it's one thing to point fingers, Australia, but how do you feel about where we sit in the equation? Give me a why if you think we're a million times better. Give me a hell no if you think, well, it's pretty average out here as well. Maybe not quite as soap opera or slapstick comedy as the US. But if you think about the passion and the policy and the positioning, we do have people with heartbeats and pulses. But ultimately, we're not doing too great over here. If you have a look in Europe as well, if you have a look in many of the representative countries of the EU, who's in the power that sits behind them, have a look at the UK. It's a bit of a shit show. And so what's happening in France is very much in my opinion, very much a sign of the French getting rather pissed off. And the French are quite patriotic and quite how would I say? They're willing to put themselves and their views out there quite publicly, and willing to demonstrate them vocally and physically. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I'm not here to judge. But ultimately, they're pissed off with the state of things. So they're out there, and interesting players are coming to power as a result of it. I think when we jump back into Wealth, Wine and Wisdom, it's worth sort of having a little bit more of a chat about global politics and some of these shifting of tides. But ultimately, really what I wanted to bring from this is that what we seem to be accepting of now is that politicians will just lie. And we've always kind of known that, but now it seems to be that we just accept that. We accept that that's a part of politics. And so, this idea of, no, we didn't cause that policy. That was done by somebody else. And no, we never said that. Well, fucking yes, you did. Just because you said you didn't doesn't make it true. I mean, who's had those arguments with their kids for long enough to go, yes, you did. No, we didn't. Yes, you did. No, we didn't. Morning, David. So, there's this idea that we're accepting, complete and utter lies from our politicians, not just here, but globally now. It's now accepted that they're just going to lie through their teeth, and we're not doing anything about it with our votes. We're implicit in, what's actually happening out there. So where do we actually look? And you go, well, Andy, that's just politics. Politics has always been like that. Well, it hasn't always been like that. And it will not always be like that. It will change. There are different seasons to politics. But ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the facts and the data. So let's have a look at what politics, or where politics has got us globally over the last couple of decades. So what we're looking at here, oops, my power's going to run out. It might be short on time, so I might have to cut this a little bit short. But plenty of information to keep us cracking into the future. But for those of you who can see this, we've got a map of the world, and it's this is a presentation that Malcolm gave. It's sourced from UBS data, and it talks about sovereignty and our financial security. So the red, and for those of you who can't see it, red countries here represent AAA rating debt. So Moody's credit rating for sovereign bonds around the world, right? So if you were to buy a bond from the Australian government, it's still AAA rated. If you were to buy it from New Zealand, it's still AAA. We've got Norway, we've got Denmark, we've got, I think, Iceland up the top there. We've got Canada, Alaska, America, North America are still sovereign states, or still have AAA ratings. The rest of the world is now AA, or down to the lowest rating that you can get on sovereign security. Now, that's a massive change over time. So you kind of go, okay, well, maybe in Australia we're doing something right because we've still got some sort of sovereignty in our bonds. But let's have a look at the defaulting, right? So number one, globally, the credit rating of most countries has actually gone down. There's a few of us that are still up in the AAA rating, but nowhere near as many as before. If we have a look at this, we look at, well, this was something that I actually just learnt about a couple of weeks ago, which was the stability of the Bretton Woods Accord. This was an American initiative to try and make sure that ensure economic prosperity. And it seemed to work very well for a period of time. I won't go into the Bretton Woods Accord right now, but interesting to look it up. But it worked, right? It was brought in. It decreased the level of defaults. That's what this graph's all about, of defaulting on companies' debt. And now, as we see coming through to 2022, we're actually seeing a rise in the defaults coming through. So these are literally the facts that sit behind the economic policies, the policies that were put in place. And this takes time for these facts to come through. That's the beauty about politics, is you're making decisions now that you will not see the results for until you're outside of politics again. The real ramifications of some of the decisions that were made in the pandemic will be realized, from this year moving forward, but most of the people who made those decisions are no longer in politics. That's one of the issues. So when we're voting, we need to be able to vote with a bit of foresight and knowledge as to what are the decisions that are being made today. What's the second, third, fourth order consequence of those decisions? Because I only ever talk about the first, and that's the problem with popular politics. So this is a really interesting one run by The Economist. So this goes to talk about authoritarian regimes, hybrid regimes, flawed democracies, right, and full democracies. So what part of the world is either totally authoritarian. So think Putin, think China, right? They're old world, if you will, authoritarian regimes. And Australia, still, arguably, still full democracy. No, it is full democracy. US is now sitting into the flawed democracy systems. So what do they mean by flawed democracies? Meaning that it's not a true representation of what a democracy is, that the people vote and allocate the governments. China have been arguing for years that they're a democracy because they ultimately have the illusion of choice of parties coming in. But it is an illusion of choice. But perhaps where I'll finish up on today, because we're jumping past 8:35. Where do politics and facts meet? Well, they meet in the facts, and the facts are in the future, right? So today's decision, the facts are realised many years into the future. And if we just have a look at some of the interesting trends, right, that are coming through right now. So the global order, living standards have been hit hard by the pandemic and social decay. Now, this is ultimately, one of the fundamental responsibilities of government. And if you have a look at the left-hand side here, Human Development Index, global average. So what this is actually saying is the pre-COVID trend was a pretty strong increase, right? The actual trend has dropped off, which actually means now that children who are being born now statistically should live less years than what we are now. That's effectively what this slide is alluding to. Now, and this is based on current data. Part of the issues that sit behind some of the social decay, things like crime, drugs. If we have a look at drugs in the US in the last 12 months, just an absolutely unfathomable amount of deaths due to drugs in general, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin. Heroin's on the decline, so at least one drug's getting out of the system. But ultimately, this is a really hard-hitting statistic, which is, the downstream of politics. It's also downstream of global events. But how these events are managed go to the social order, the social impact, the social change. And this social change is one where the statistics are saying right now that statistically, the probabilities that somebody who's born today actually has a shorter life expectancy than you or I. Now, that's pretty wild. I mean, it's also a little bit of a crystal ball type of statistic that is based on hard data, though, based on hard statistical data. And these are the types of things that we really need to be looking at when it comes to how we vote, but also when we invest, we need to be thinking about these things. So what are the downstream consequences? Not just I don't want this, you're a wanker. I mean, you may be right on both fronts, right? But ultimately, as investors and as voters, we need to be thinking, what is the second, third, fourth order consequence of the decisions that are being made today? And perhaps I'll leave it with this one, and we'll riff on this a lot more in Wealth, Wine and Wisdom in coming weeks, months. But ultimately, I'm not going to go into explaining this in a great deal of detail here. But effectively, what's happened around the world is that governments have gone into more debt, which means that they've got a greater interest bill, and then as a result, the way that they're then funding things that need to be done is to just print more money. Now, one might argue that system passed its mathematical probability of being able to change some time ago, and that my math goes back to Barack Obama and the debt ceiling, which is now many, many years ago, which was a ceiling where they said that US can't go beyond this debt effectively because it'll almost bankrupt the US. Now, that was far surpassed eons ago. So some of the things that have changed is that we're now fully allowing politicians to lie and just accepting of that's the way that things are. But there seems to be this acceptance now that we will just print more money in order to do whatever we want, make whatever decisions that we want. And this is when I sit and put on my future hat and my investor hat and my voting hat, these are things that I think about. I think, well, what is the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year downstream ramifications of us doing this. Some people might say, well, everyone's bankrupt. Well, if everyone's bankrupt, we're all in the same place, which means that if we all figure out our debt positions, we kind of reset the clock. These are interesting concepts. Nobody really knows the answers to them. But one thing is certainly clear, and it was even stated, believe it or not, by our most recent treasurer, who basically said we don't expect to be running in a surplus for the foreseeable future, which means that we're just going to continue to go into more and more debt. So that's an interesting economic outlook. These are the politicians that we currently have in play, and these are the policies that are being set now. But ultimately, they're the ones that we're voting for. So where do the facts and politics meet? Well, the facts of the decisions that are made today are going to be 4, 5, 10, 25 years into the future. And I'll probably leave you guys today with, I'll see if I can quote it, but I might butcher it. But it was Peter Costello, who was a former treasurer of Australia under John Howard's leadership at that point in time. And he said that low Australian or low government debt is a youth policy, right? Is a youth policy. Vote for Pedro, Jeff. Love it. So low government debt is a youth policy. And what he meant by that is, us having lower debt as a government now ensures the prosperity of the country for the people, our children, that we're handing the country over to. So my question to everyone now is, do we want to take care of the leaders of tomorrow, or are we the grey nomads and we're just going to spend it and have a great time on the way out, and they can just sort it out when it's their turn to take over the reins? Those are the decisions we will make today. Those are the politicians' decisions that they'll be making today, and the facts that we'll see on the back of them will be 10, 15, 20 years into the future. Where do they meet? In the future. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been awesome hanging out with you. Thanks for going on my little tirade with getting back into the news. It's really inspired me to make sure that when Witten comes back, that we relaunch Wealth, Wine and Wisdom and start having a little bit more of a chat, because there's a lot going on out there, and I'd love to decode and provide perspectives and then provide facts, and then get some really good intellectual minds in to provide their very learned perspectives so that we can share that with you guys. So from me to you, team, happy Thursday morning. Have a cracker. Have a great weekend coming, and I look forward to seeing all of you guys soon, perhaps on another Wealth Coffee Chat or on a Wealth, Wine and Wisdom. Morning, team. Have a great day. Andy Fenton signing out.
Episode of Wealth Coffee Chat, folks. Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you never miss a thing when we go live. Improve your portfolio and investing game, folks, with Wealth Coffee Chats live every morning at 8:10 each weekday. Make sure you join us. Previous episodes are also available wherever you get your podcasts, folks, as well as our other podcasts from the 6-Star team here at positivementor.com.au.